Welcome to the Craftsman Online podcast. This is a weekly program focused on the relevant topics in Freemasonry and the various aspects of the craft. Any opinions, thoughts, or viewpoints shared during this program are that of the individual and do not reflect the official position of any Grand Lodge, appendant, or concordant body from which that member may hail. I'm your host, Brother Michael Arce, co-founder of CraftsmanOnline.com, and I look forward to bringing him in every other week. My unofficial co-host and Masonic best friend, Brother John S. Nagy. Welcome back, Brother Nagy.
As I said before, it's an honor to be here, and the fact that you've interviewed me so many times, it blows my mind. So I'll just leave it at that. Thank you very much for having me back.
I'm excited for a mind-blowing episode because for our listener, our regular listener, normally we talk about some of the themes and the topics that Brother Nagy, not only as an established Mason, but also as an author and speaker, has written or spoke about. And to my knowledge, he does not have a book on this topic yet, but we have begun discussing, one of us getting serious about some written work to talk about listening to the architect of the universe. And where this all began is in the term, we've heard it, in God's hand. And when it comes to being reassured of the master plan, what does that mean? A lot of us have questions about that. Are there decisions that we make in the moments of our lives that ultimately affect our outcomes? And we just decided this would be a great podcast episode after kind of connecting after a previous episode. And just to level set, let's start here. When you hear the term listening to the universe, what does that mean to you?
Prior to Freemasonry, I went through a program that a lot of brothers know to be a 12-step recovery program. When I was working the steps, one of the things I came across was if I looked at my history and looked at all the decisions that I made and all the points where I strayed from the straight and narrow, where I made a conscious decision to not do what was straightforward and direct. I twisted from the path, so to speak. That was when I wound up having my greatest challenges in life. And it was that self-examination, taking that searching and fearless moral inventory of myself where I looked at where I strayed. Now, that being said, I gained some tremendous insight. And it's made my life a little bit more richer as far as my insights into what happens when one does stray. So I speak from experience when I talk with brothers who I see are straying, because I've been there, done that, and I've got a closet full of bloody T-shirts to prove my point.
We have this bond as friends, and I'm excited to hear more about your story, but I think also for our listener to kind of understand the different perspectives that come into play here. Because similar to you, I grew up in a small town, had a very religious background early in the beginning of my life, and then, typical, went off to college, started reading some books. And I think the first book that I read that kind of started questioning the idea of fate and coincidence was a book called The Celestine Prophecy.
Yeah, I remember that.
The whole concept was, connecting with nature, seeing the energy that comes from other people. I didn't understand these themes fully because I was 18 years old at the time. But then later in life and kind of getting into Freemasonry and starting to discover more modern books, at least one of the authors, Malcolm Gladwell, when he started talking about the outliers and connecting success and these hidden moments of opportunity and what, identifying those. And then after becoming a Freemason and getting into more of the classics, Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, I started reading a lot about that and getting into Stoicism and thinking of the whole concept of time, just across generations and the deeper meanings of things. That's when I started kind of realizing that there is a plan for each and every one of us. It's pretty much been determined since before we were born, and that while life has several different variables, it's a giant algorithm in itself. You could sit there and pinpoint where certain moments you made a decision that changed your life, and then you take a step back. I think it happens as we get older in life, honestly, and we go, well, could I have done this differently? And what would have happened if I had made this decision? Or where would I be today if this or that hadn't happened?
There are several books that just absolutely impressed me and changed the direction of my life. Rabbi Harold Kushner's "When Bad Things Happen to Good People." Um, it gave me permission. There was a learned rabbi who was questioning the faith and the way that God was described to him.
Mm.
If there's a learned rabbi who can question and come to his own conclusions, who am I not to do the same thing? There was a 2-book powder keg that I wound up reading in my early 30s. One was called The Book by Alan Watts, subtitled "On the Taboo of Knowing Who You Truly Are," or something along that line. And in that book, he goes on to say, life is essentially meaningless.
Mm.
And I had come to that conclusion in my early 30s. So it's like, okay, I got validation. It was a twofold punch that came right after that. He then said, and it doesn't mean anything that it doesn't mean anything. I had to think about that. It took me about 3 years to understand fully what he meant by that, because in that time, I had literally invested great meaning in meaninglessness. And so as a result of doing that, and 3 years into it, I finally got it, that if life itself is essentially meaningless, that means nothing. I mean, literally, there's a validation that if it means nothing, then why do we assign any meaning to it? And then the second punch that hit was, oh my God, if I can invest in a life that is meaningless and come to the conclusion that why bother, because it's all meaningless, I have just assigned that meaning to the life that I'm living.
Mm.
And so if I had assigned that and spent 3 years literally up to my nose wallowing in meaninglessness, if I were to turn that around and say, well, if I can take that same investment and find meaning for myself in life, what difference would that make for me? And I can tell you, it's made all the difference in the world, because now that I have assigned meaning to my life, I'm finding more and more meaning because I've trained myself to find meaning as opposed to accept there was no meaning. And at the same time, I was reading a book called One by Richard Bach, the same guy who wrote Jonathan Livingston Seagull, which I loved and I still love, Illusions, Adventures of a Reluctant Messiah, and Bridge Over Tomorrow or something like that. But I read One. And he's in an airplane and he goes up with his girlfriend and he's literally watching all the patterns below him, which is very, very poetic, because as they go into the pattern, they visit themselves at decision points in their life where their different self had made a different decision somewhere in their life and was literally living a different life as a consequence of that one choice that they made. Somewhere in the book, I came away with a conclusion. I don't know if I'm paraphrasing, if he actually wrote this, or it was a conclusion I came to, that I am the you that made a different choice. And that's the whole basis of One. We're all together in this, but we're all making different choices so that we're living different lives because of those subtle choices that we make.
I've always been trying to find a way to explain our Masonic phrase, having been tried, never denied, and ready to be tried again. And I think a lot of brothers hear that and they must think, oh, because I studied and I did the work and the ritual to get up to this point. And it could mean that. But to me, it's what you're talking about, is that we have this shared experience that's called life. And who am I to know or to judge or to much less even understand the struggles and the trials that you've gone through that have shaped you to be the man that you are? Just like you could take a look at me and there are things that I've done in my life that I can say no one else has ever done this. Maybe you have come close, maybe not, but we all have these unique individual moments, these experiences, and that's what makes it special kind of when we come together. So that's when you start recognizing when they try to, paint a picture or use words to describe the infinite possibilities that exist in the universe, just how big it is. Just sit down across from somebody at the table and say, all right, start on day one that you can remember in your life. What are some of the things that you've gone through? Wow, I have never done all of that. And we are the same people in the same space at the same time.
and I will answer your question, who am I? I'll tell you exactly who you are. You are my brother, and I have empowered you to judge me with candor based on a set of conditions that I promised that I would adhere to.
Mm.
And when I don't adhere to those set of principles and conditions, I have empowered you as my brother to judge me with candor and help me guide myself back on the straight and narrow. But I have to be open and available to that. And if I'm not, it's up to you to basically back off until I am. That's who you are.
The other thing we talk about is the first place that you're prepared to be a Mason or be made a Mason is in your heart. The next place is actually in a Masonic lodge. So a lot of where our degree begins is actually understanding that there's key points in life where you need to ask for the aid of deity, higher power, God, whoever you want to call him, they, that, their, whatever. When was a specific moment in your life, John, where you realized that your plan was not his plan? And when we say his from this point on in our conversation tonight, his is your deity, who you answer to.
Well, it's still my plan, just as it's still your plan. I beg to differ with a lot of the conclusions that are made by that statement that is taken directly out of the text, the Holy Scripture, thy will be done, not my will. And what it really comes down to is if you are in alignment with that which is good, that which is functional and healthy, that which is morally well-founded, you're going to make the right choices. We've been given supposedly free will. And if you go back to the good book, that free will came directly out of the Spirit of God entering into the dirt and creating an atom from the Adama, an earthling from the earth, a human from the humus. I love the variations. They're all basically saying the same thing. God put God's Spirit into the earth and made an earthling. And in that, it says right in the Scripture, emerged a living soul. And Adam, according to literature, was the first human being and the first person who had a soul. And in that, as God has free will, he also permitted humankind to have free will. And if we make the right choices, not according to some plan that God has put in front of us, but there are some guidelines of making choices that are always going to optimize your results. And if you can get in tune with the optimization of the choices, people say, well, that's God's will. It says, no, God put down a course and we have an infinite amount of choices that we can make. Some are more optimal than others. And it, based on our unique personality and our skills and our talents, it is up to us to figure out what the optimum is for us, what the optimum decisions and the optimal choices are. And let me share with you a little bit behind the difference between the two words. A choice is what you want. It makes absolutely nothing, no difference whatsoever what else is offered to you. You don't care for all those other options. You care for only one choice. Whereas a decision is you're cutting one option off to the inclusion of another. So if you have to choose between hot dogs and hamburgers, well, if you didn't like hamburgers, it's the choice is hot dogs if you like hot dogs. But it might be that you like neither one of them. What's your choice? Well, your choice is, well, I know you're offering that to me, but I'd much rather have ice cream and pizza.
Mm.
So the choice is you're going toward what you want, whereas a decision is you're selecting between one and the other, and in deciding you're cutting off the other and you're opting for the one that you decided on. A decision always includes loss, whereas a choice, you really couldn't care what was left behind. You have what you want. And so we're making decisions in our life and we're making choices in our life. And the more choices you make, the more genuine your life actually is. The more decisions you make, the more you're going to be cutting off that which is not going to be opted for and is likely going to make your life a little bit more richer. So there is decision and choice. You got to be able to know what to let go of. And you need to be able to identify what it is that you truly want and pursue it with the passion of a man with his hair set on fire for a bucket of water behind a brick wall.
Well, and to use that analogy, because I think the way that you painted the two is very beautiful. I would say earlier in my life, I think most young men would agree to this, that life was really just about choice. For a lot of the, for lack of a better term, poor decision-making skills that we had, it was just all choice-based, what felt good or seemed right at the moment. And then as we age, we get the benefit of wisdom where we can step back and actually start making some of those decisions. And when I realized that my plan wasn't his plan, was when I realized I have to work so much harder to make some of the things that I want to have happen. When if I just start to recognize these opportunities that are being presented to me, it's like a door that was open that I thought I had closed, or that maybe time or life had closed, and here is that opportunity. But I wasn't thinking about it. So now I have to sit here and go, okay, let me check the ego at the door and say, hey, you up there, is this a sign? Do you want me? It couldn't be any more clear when it's an opportunity that's in front of you. Yeah.
I love going back to the Masonic way. We have unbelievable opportunity in our lives. As the old saying goes, luck is the intersection of preparation and opportunity. If you follow the path that is clearly laid out by ritual, dialogue, and what have you, you are first preparing your heart. You bring yourself from chaos to order. Then you take the second stage, which is what I refer to as Entered Apprentice 2.0, where you work on your head and you get your head together and you bring order to the chaos of your thinking. If you bring order to the chaos of your heart and then bring order to the chaos of your thinking, what happens is you're properly prepared, and literally the world is your oyster. You are prepared to meet opportunity head on. You have the skills, you have the know-how, you have the training, you have the order, and you're more apt to succeed because you have prepared the way for the opportunities that cross your path daily.
One of the things that I was always mystified by and still working to fully understand is the whole concept of the grand architect of the universe in Freemasonry. And not because it's a substitute word that we use so that, Freemasonry can seem more appealing or more accepting to all faiths and all men, different walks of life, because part of that is true. But it really takes the idea of God. And when you're younger, I think we could all close our eyes and think to when we were kids and like what we thought when we heard the word God, and that it was like a spirit, something larger than myself that solely just worked for me. That was just watching me, maybe my family, maybe my loved ones, and then it started to extend and extend. And when you understand the realm of the grand architect of the universe, you're like, wow. And this is the amazing part, is when you start listening to the universe. And this was the experience that I had, where every day in my late 30s, I would drive by a speed limit sign. It would say speed limit 40, which was a reminder like, hey, in 2 years, 38, you're going to be 40 years old. Like, wow. And I started thinking about the various checkpoints. And I think we've all been down, certain stages in our life where we thought we would be, or where we wanted to be, or strived, or what our plan was. And I realized that what I was working on at that time was very me centric, and I wasn't really listening to every other opportunity that was being presented to myself. And the conclusion for me was that I started looking at listening to the universe as kind of like when gears start to fall in place, like on a bicycle with the gear and the bike chain, and how when it's really working together, you don't need a lot of oil on that chain. It's just, yeah. What started to motivate me was to be more in tune when opportunities would come my way. You can't live life like you're a leaf in the stream and you're the Jim Carrey Yes Man movie character where you say yes to everything because the universe is going to provide. It doesn't. You still have to be active and a participant. But it does get to the other big thing that I think a lot of us mistake fate or chance with an opportunity that would present itself. And how do you counsel people or talk with people about the difference between fate, chance, and opportunity?
Go back to the Celestine Prophecies. The number one thing I pulled from that book is the statement that, and I don't like it the way it's stated, but I'll go into it. There's no such thing as a coincidence. And what I gathered from that is the word coincidence literally means everything is happening at the same time. So if everything's happening at the same time, then if I'm going to learn anything from what it is that's going on in front of me, I've got to position myself very favorably to receive the lessons that are presenting themselves. So I've got to have a clear mind and a clear direction and a clear goal. The only way that I can do a learning lesson on an ongoing basis to become a perpetual student. So the Celestine Prophecies, what I gathered, a biggie from that book, was that I had to position myself to learn from every condition that occurs. Instead of saying, why me? Or if I only did this, I changed that entire statement to what lesson just presented itself to me? What can I learn from it? And if I had any evidence of learning from what just happened, how would my behavior change when similar conditions would occur?
Mm-hmm.
I will tell you one of the greatest things that I did in my 12-step days, diverting a little bit here, by looking back and seeing what I did before puberty hit, where those hormones were just raging through my system, I was thinking like a young man. Prior to that moment, I had some absolute passions in my life. I loved reading. I loved researching. I loved pursuing knowledge. And when puberty hit, my jaunts to the library and my taking out of books ceased for quite some time. And when I started getting back into looking at myself, looking at my life, I started recognizing that the joys that I experienced most was when I was pursuing light. Well, from that moment on, I listened to the universe. But these are the things that we discover when we examine our life, what was called the long body, looking at the past, looking into the future, saying, okay, when was I most rewarded? When did I find that my life was really working well? Who were the individuals who really nurtured me and opened doors that I didn't even realize they were doing at the time because my head was so far up in a dark place? I'll let you imagine where that is. And that I didn't realize until long decades after the fact what had been done for me at that time.
Mm.
If you want to get a good understanding of what your spiritual building is, take a look at other people's lives that you admire and respect. Then take a look at the fact that God's designs and purpose and what have you is clearly laid out in the trestle board of what is called the two-book theology, both a book of Revelation and book of nature.
Mm.
Back to what I was saying, there are optimal decisions and choices that you have to be attuned to making in order to make your life work well. And if you want to have a rich, well-lived life, well, you have to make the optimal choices and decisions. And how do you know what those are? Well, You've got a rich history within the biblical lore, and you've got a rich history of book of nature in front of you, which, by the way, the Tao is all about how nature works. And so we're back to, if you look at how the Tao is constructed, it's all natural. We're talking about it is a written work that describes how nature operates. It's another book of nature.
The one phrase that, we hear a lot in ritual, some of us have even said, is, this important privilege of being a Freemason. And it's more than just getting to come to a lodge room and, wear a dark suit and tie and the nice dinners or the social events, because we definitely have those, or maybe other like-minded men that you get to have relationships with. Those are all wonderful things as well. The brotherhood, the fraternity, respect all of that. But I think the important privilege is exactly what you're touching upon, is that you do get to that certain point in life where you start asking the bigger questions. So you put yourself in a humble position, which you don't understand it at the time as someone entering the craft, that you are seeking the aid of deity to make some sense of this, to show you a path, to show you a way. And as you said, once you recognize that, well, then you begin to understand things. I also wanted to touch on this other concept as well. As someone that really got into the Stoics, the term that they use is fate permitting, and that there'll be external forces that either can help or impede your progress at any given time. And the one thing I want the listener tonight to digest is that we're not saying don't set goals for yourself, don't set a plan for yourself. You should, and you actively should do that. What I'd like to know from you, Brother John, as a coach, how do you help or counsel men that come to you that are looking for goal setting, but also realistic goal setting? What is the process that you outline?
A little story I wanted to share with you. Quite a few years ago, I guess it might have been 15 now, I'll turn out by saying everybody's okay, and everybody was okay. All right. No major damage to anybody in the car. We had a head-on collision coming out of a schoolyard, and the head-on collision was at about maybe 15 miles an hour, literally took my front end out. It was like watching a slow motion train wreck. And my boys in the back said, "Dad, I wanted to warn you. We could have stopped it. We could have prevented." Without even thinking twice, I said, "You have no idea what was down the road beyond this particular point that was about to greet us. This accident prevented us from going down the road and meeting something far greater. We got stopped now before we went any further." My son started realizing that some of the stopping points in their life where they're really discouraged and what they perceive to be really bad things. When you listen to the universe, you have to be attuned to, even when the bad things that you think are happening that are holding you back, sometimes what they're doing is they're just stalling you a little bit, let you get your foot bearing, and it allows you to slow down so that the opportunities that are going to greet you are able to catch up with you.
Always know how to end these so well. It's such a gift that you have. We're going to start calling him the closer. He's so good at this. Our brother John Nagy, once again, our guest this week on the Craftsman Online podcast. I can't wait to see you again in 2 weeks.
And next time we'll mention the Masonic unicorns.
Until we do get back together next week, if Masonic education is important to you, we've got a bunch of that on our website at craftsmanonline.com. A reminder that new episodes of our podcast are available for download every Monday morning. Until next time, let peace and harmony prevail.